Well, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to another learning from After's Heart Ministries. I'm Rabbi Q, and I have a question for you. Dwell with your wives with understanding that she is the weaker vessel. Really? She's the weaker vessel? That and more on this teaching and understanding that we're going to jump into with After's Heart Ministries. Again, I'm Rabbi Q. And we need to ask that question. What is the weaker vessel? Well, in that process, I think one of the things that we need to do first is we need to establish some ground rules. And one of the ground rules that we need to establish is that, number one, if there is a context of authority within the marriage, it is not the context of distribution of light. Okay, I know I just said a mouthful there. So let me begin with a very important verse. That verse is actually 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. It says, "He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God." Now, there's a number of things I think that we should probably work through. And the first one is that that's not a substitutionary sacrifice. Okay, that is a mistake that Christianity and its theology has made concerning the issue because of its belief about what the sacrifice was in the Old Testament. A mistake that is clarified and covered by the book of Hebrews. However, we would probably have to agree as Torah observants, not Christians, as Torah observants, that Hebrews has some serious ramifications for being in a canon that a olive tree believer has. Okay? Again, that's probably a mouthful for somebody who's watching for the first time. So let me establish some things. If you name the name of Christ as a context of him being your quote unquote savior, in Romans chapter 10, verse 9, I believe it says, if we believe in our hearts and confess with our mouths that Jesus Christ is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. And then in Romans chapter 10, verse 13, it says, all who call upon the name of the Lord, which is Yahweh, from Joel chapter 2, verses 32, will be saved. And so contextually, then we'll just go ahead and identify that anybody who names the name of Christ as a Messiah is within the context of this information that I'm about to give, which is simple. If you are the nation of Israel, whether bloodline or adopted, and you have the Messiah in place correctly, then contextually you are grafted in. Grafted into what? The root of all things, Torah. You say, how could that possibly be? It says that Christ is the root. Aha. Yes. And it also says that Torah became flesh and dwelt among us, right? And he came unto his own, and his own did not recognize him. And those who decided to receive him were given the rights to become sons of God. Okay, so in context, then we can accept that Torah is actually a person. Oh, but we're going to go a step further. We're going to say that Torah is a soul. And if Torah is a soul, then it is a balancing mechanism within the universe. Oh yeah, we're not ready for that one yet, are we? Okay, so in principle, if you are grafted into the root, then you are grafted into Torah. Why is that so important? Because Torah is the covenant. And what you need to know is that when it says, when Yeshua takes his cup, right, he raises it up and he says, take you and drink you all of it. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you do it, which consequently, as a side note, is Passover only. But anyways, drinking that cup, and he says, for it is the new covenant sealed in my blood. Okay, so there's a number of things you need to know. Number one is that Moses, before that time, which is ancient for us, was preaching the synagogues from ancient times, which means it was way, way, way back then, right? In other words, every week a part of Torah is exposed to whoever is sitting in the synagogue. That's the point James was making in Acts chapter 15, verse 21. Okay, so that was for the new Christian coming in who has not yet been inside of the realm of my rhetoric. Now, for the Torah observant, the one who has Messiah properly in place in its context and filter, would then appreciate the context and filter of the righteousness of God. In short, everything that he had a right to do and be was left here on earth after he left for us as a restoration of what we were supposed to be and do from the beginning, which was dominion in the context of authority, jurisdictional authority in the sense that is granted by something else, power, which a lot of you just can't handle. You need to stay in logic. You can't stand the supernatural. You can't stand the vibrational energy. You can't stand the tinglies and none of that stuff, right? And the corporate collective consciousness of which you are currently, even if you're Torah observant, even if you're olive tree theology, disconnected from and disassociated from, as a result of a distortion that has not really met its match yet. And what I mean by that is that there is still a context of Christianese and you Torah observance, and you Christians have yet to even grasp the concept of the theology I'm talking about. That is not an insult. That is a challenge that you wake up, do the right thing, let go of the Christian theology and realize that part of that thing is a system designed to keep you docile, to keep you behaving correctly. All you need to do is go back into the Catholic archives and the Protestant archives and see where it says these things, where Luther says, they can't be trusted with this. They cannot interpret the Bible themselves. They need our help. And what does the Catholics do? Oh, they take it a step further. They say they're the vicar of Christ. So whatever they say goes, because they are the embodiment of Christ. Okay. So can I start with that should scare you at this moment? That there are things that belong in your life that are not in your life as a result of the fact that they were removed in order to make sure that you behave yourself. Because they're afraid that if you get too much knowledge and start going off into left field, that you are going to catch one of their pop flies and they're going to be out. Okay? All right. So here is the importance. When we're dealing with the context of marriage, you need to know that, and I've searched this out. I've worked really, really hard to try to prove myself wrong on this. From what I can tell, there is no other context in the Bible. There is a warrior, but he's a warrior as a husband. There is a bride and a concept of a princess and a virgin, but she is within the context of marriage. In fact, one of the things you need to know is that there is a very unknown element of covenant within the confines of not witnesses and state licensing and promises made within a relationship between a man and a woman, regardless of their quote unquote marital status. And what I mean by that is that there are contexts by which covenant is simply consummation. Now, where this becomes important is then we start to understand that if there is any jurisdictional authority granted, it will never be within the context of inequality. I'll explain. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God, is not gender specific. And what I mean by that is that although Paul was writing to male people, because of a serious problem that the masculine gender at that time had with women, remember, this is the Roman Empire with a Hellenistic flair because this is being written to the Corinthians, extremely Hellenistic, polytheistic people. And what you miss and don't know about them is that they had a strong belief in sexual union as a context for worship. Okay? Now, having said that, I think it's very, very important that we remember he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so we might become the righteousness of God, means identity is unmerited. But it also means that it is not just for you men. Now, where this becomes extremely important is in the hidden gem that is the female. And we're going to get into that today. We're going to understand that in a way that you've never understood it before. And we're going to get into a context that I can tell you may or may not take more than one part. This could be part one. Okay? So to start with, I think what we should do is go investigate this Greek word to begin with, because truth be told is one of the aggravations within this entire system of trying to A, wake people up, B, help them unlearn things that are destructive to their effectiveness, and C, help them learn things that are effective. Those are the challenges. So let's see if I can explain. Your language, the English language, is a very profane language. In fact, many people understand and believe that English is actually a very harsh and barbaric language. Now, the intrigue is in the fact that we believe that we are the liberators of the world. Americans do. And truth be told is England kind of believed that in their colonization system. They believed that they were liberating these Aboriginal and native peoples from their error in A, non-monarchy control, and B, in a culture of barbarianism. Well, truth be told is English language is very barbaric. So let's start at the beginning and say this. In its simplicity, you cannot know even what that original Greek word really actually meant. Now, we had a minister back in the day. His name was James Strong, and I have a lot of respect for him, even though that he unfortunately had the virus. I've never really talked about this, but Christianity has a virus, and it's actually genetic. It's passed down from generation to generation, and it is that if there's anything Jewish in context, we will not include it because the Jews killed Christ. And interestingly enough, in some contexts, this becomes really dangerous because then they actually say that the Jews are patricides, father killers. Oh yeah, that one, I'm going to tell you, that's the context of the Council of Nicaea, who decided your Trinity and got rid of your Passover and added Easter. Okay, but let's say that we don't say that our religion was stolen and manipulated and changed and contextually altered so that we would behave ourselves. And let's say that we go with the idea that Paul actually did write this letter to the Corinthians in Greek. Let's go look at the Greek word. We'll use James Strong's stuff, but then we'll delete his bias, delete Nicaea's bias, and put our religion back into the context. Okay, so let's start there, because one of the things you do need to know is that misogyny as a practice is as systemic as some of the claims of racial or bigotry bias that the left claims the right has issues with. What I mean by that is that the treatment in women and the belief about women is so deeply ingrained into the philosophy of a masculine forward religion that we don't even really notice that it's there anymore. And what's crazy is identity is lost to the female. Well, I hope today, A, to restore that, and B, to remove that. And what I mean is I want to remove the misogynistic philosophy that is deeply ingrained and genetically passed down from generation to generation, as if Christianity had genetics. And also I want to remove, or I mean, I want to add in an equality, but I want to clear up some things. Okay, so that should give you some context to which you could say, oh, Q's about to rip this verse apart. You're darn right. All right, so let's get into it. So first of all, and I think this is important, we need to go and look at the whole verse in a context of information. Okay. And so when we go into this, what we're going to be looking for is a piece of information that would help us understand why it was said. Okay. All right. So let's start at the beginning. Let's see. What is this one? This one here? Yep. Okay. In the same way you wives, by the way, NASB 9.95, right? In the same way you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. Number two, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Now, what we're about to read is seriously misinterpreted in a lot of ways, not only contextually, historically, and fundamentally, but is also an area of abuse within the misogynistic framework. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair, wearing gold jewelry, or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. Oh my gosh, could I write some misogynistic sermons with that, right? You need to hide yourself. You need to be quiet. Don't don't speak up. Oh, and not only that, but God approves of that. That's some dark stuff. And if you really adjust your brain to the context of equality between the genders, whoo, boy, we started on a really bad foundation. Let's fix that foundation. Okay, back to the verses. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right, without being frightened by any fear. Now, can we be real here for a second? Can we really actually just kind of take the veil off and be truthful? If you have a spouse, turn to them right now and see if they buy into any of that hogwash I just read. Because truth be told is in the heart of hearts of the women who walk a walk with God. They know that this verse does not register with them. It doesn't jive with them. It doesn't make sense to them. Because, again, it has been misinterpreted. Now, what I'm not going to do today is I'm not going to spend my window of opportunity wasting your time trying to retranslate those first few verses. Because the one that you need to grasp is verse 7. And what we need to tear apart is the weaker vessel. The rest of that, calling him Lord and all that, just stop, because you do not understand the context. You do not understand the historical importance and cultural importance of those verses. And if you really want insight, what you need to know is that Peter was speaking in a mystical sense by using examples of other esoteric women. In other words, what you think you see on that page from verse 1 to verse 6, it's not what you think it is. And you're going to find that verse 7 actually isn't that much either. However, in order to understand the most important element of this weaker vessel is to understand the true nature of our Father, Abba, Yahweh, and the context of sonship and the context of the Yeshua principle within that framework. In other words, what you thought you understood about the Messiah, you probably don't. What you thought you understood about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you definitely don't. And what you think you understand about this verse, even if you're a female, even if you wrote a book about how to submit to your husband, you were wrong. You were so wrong, and dangerously, dangerously wrong when it comes to the supernatural realm and the power of the demonic forces and other things that were trying to get this to happen in the first place. So put your seatbelts on because we're about to get into it. Okay, here we go. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. Whoa. Guys, I'm going to tell you something. You men, I know I just been speaking to the women a little bit. Now it's your turn. You men, I cannot tell you what you're missing out on because you lost the concept in this misogynistic virus that's within Christianity, Islam, every Abrahamic religion, because of Sarah's power. Because of Sarah's power. Sarah's power was so extraordinarily fine-tuned and so extraordinarily processed within this framework. And what I mean by that is she understood how to be and how to act. And I'm going to tell you right now, what you don't know about her is going to hurt you. So we should probably find out about the woman, about the female, about the feminine. So let's deal with this weaker vessel stuff. Here we go. So where am I getting the weaker vessel? Well, that came from our blessed king, that Anglican culprit, James. Bam, right there. Weaker vessel. Weaker vessel. Okay, now let's look at Young, right? He's this alternative translation to the King James. And what does he say? Weaker vessel, right? Weaker vessel. Let's do a Bible comparison real quick. How about that? Let's do that. Bible comparison. Probably about, I don't know, 14 different Bibles. So we've got weaker vessel, weaker partner, weaker vessel, weaker vessel, weaker partner, weaker than you are. Oh my gosh, NLT. Blech. Let's see. Weaker vessel, someone weaker. Well, oh my gosh, at least NSB kind of cleans it up a little bit. Let's see, amplified. Oh my gosh. As someone physically weaker. I evidently haven't met any German women. Okay, so let's see here. RSV, weaker sex. Oh, dear God in heaven. And that was the foundation of American Christianity, the Revised Standard Version. American Standard Version, the Catholic Bible, weaker vessel, Darby version, our founder of the rapture, as with weaker, even female vessel. Oh my gosh. Okay, and let's see. Weaker vessel. Okay, and then, oh, feebler. Oh my gosh, look at the basic Bible, basic English Bible. Honor to women who is the feebler vessel. Oh my goodness. Okay. I think we've seen enough. I can't do anymore. Okay. You saw it. I gave you at least 20 different versions that all say weaker vessel. So we should probably go see if that's actually what it says in the Greek. and then we need to return it to its proper language. Let's see if we can do that. Okay. All right, here we go. In the interlinear, we are dealing with the word. I'll just come down here to weaker and see this. Asthenes. Let's listen to our guy pronounce it.
Strong's G 772. Asthenes.
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 Okay, so two things that are very important. The alpha, which is this A looking thing right here in Greek, is the negation particle. In other words, whatever follows after the alpha is the opposite of whatever it is. So the A is the negation particle in the sense of removing it. In fact, let's just go look at that definition real quick. Right there, the first letter of the Greek alphabet, right? And it is used as a it's used as a does it say it's a negation particle? Oh my gosh, where'd that go? Figure two, the only the numeral of the first. Okay, alpha composition is private. And words beginning with this letter in the sense of union or contraction. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're failing there. Okay, so let's go back to this though. Let's go back to that word right there.
Strong's G 4599. Sthenao. Sthenao.
Okay, sthenao. All right. So now, my friends, the original verb means to make strong or strengthen. The alpha reverses it. And so we see that strong or strengthen as the weaker vessel. We see that word is weak, right? Weak or feeble, right? Now, going back to asthenes, we see weak, infirm, or feeble. It's used 25 times, okay? And it is the idea of being sick. Oh man, we've got the word being used as sick, weakness, weaker, weak things, impotent, more feeble, and without strength. So let's ask the question early on here. Was Peter a victim of the virus of misogyny? Do you think this enlightened being? I mean, Dick, okay, I want you to bear with me here. Let's just say for a minute that misogyny really, really ticks God off. Okay. Let's say that in context, it really bothers him that we treat women the way we do. Okay. Then let's look at some of the manifest power, dunamis of Peter. The man is walking down the street. Shadow falls on a dead dude because they got so many bodies from a plague laying in the middle of the road. He walks past him, dude gets up, dead. I'm talking about clinically verified as having passed on, expiration of the body, right? Dude gets up and is alive again. That power is granted as a result of a connection to covenant. Covenant. And so in principle, there's two things you need to know. Number one is that Peter's walking around doing that kind of stuff and he's a misogynist. Okay, I'll allow for a little bit of compartmentalization within grace because Peter had a really bad attitude, had a really bad temper, and was stupid a lot of the time. And so it's possible that he had that and could still fulfill the will of God within the kingdom of heaven. But what he did in this letter, if it be true that he was misogynistic, is destroy thousands upon millions of women's lives. Because of his letter, force of a woman to conceive has been justified. Taking another man's wife because you are a noble has been justified. The context of molestation, of deviancy within the treatment of the opposite sex by men has been justified through this verse. And so the question arises, is it all that big a deal that some cat got up off the ground who was dead because Peter walked by him, if that's the kind of dude he was? Well, I got news for you. Not only does Torah not propagate a misogyny, and some of the Jews have erred in believing that, and a lot of a lot of the opponents or enemies of the Bible have exposed that within the verses. Peter was enlightened, a master of the things that you're just now learning. And so let's err on the side of A, barbaric language translated from a misogynistic language that was probably translated from the language God chose to write the Bible with. Okay, because I'm just going to break it to you. God didn't write the Bible in Greek. Okay, he didn't write it in Aramaic. That's a Babylonian language. In fact, he didn't even write the commentaries on the Bible in Aramaic. Warning to you who believe just unequivocally in the oral Torah. Okay, so in context, then we need to kind of like try to restore this in order to really glean an understanding. Okay, so first of all, let's look back at this word vessel before we move on.
Strong's G 4632, skuos. Skuos.
Okay, and it is a vessel, translated 23 times as vessel, goods, stuff, and a sail. Okay, so the context is an implement or equipment or apparatus, or figuratively, especially a wife, as contributing to the usefulness of the husband. Oh, poor James. He really needed a vacation. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to restore context. Okay, that's the first thing. Then we need to look at historical information, and then we need to look at the mystical information. Okay, all right. So starting at the beginning, the first thing that we need to do is accept that what we think we understand about this verse has actually caused damage, and we need to undo it immediately. Okay, so that's going to be ground rule number one. Ground rule number one is that this verse in the English is extremely inappropriate. In the Greek, it's a little bit inappropriate. And if we had the Hebrew version, we would probably see the actual truth that I'm about to show you. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to talk about forward facing versus rearward facing. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to think about is that no matter what martial art you may know, or what combat art you may know, or what weapon you use, everything about offensive or defensive process as an individual is forward facing. Let me explain what I mean. Let's say that I have a rifle. Okay, I'm going to use my hands here as a rifle, and I'm going to point a little bit this way so that you can see my hands. What can you tell from this? I'm just going to point this like this so that it's a barrel, right? So what can you tell by this? Number one, what can happen to me back here? Okay, that's the first question. Back there, what we need to be concerned about is how much time it takes to raise the barrel. Why? Because in order to train it correctly here, okay, is taking time. And by that time, the back of your head is the front of your head and on the wall. So the way I want you to think about this is with a rifle, this is all you've got going on. And the time it takes to necessarily turn that way is actually the time that you're going to die. So who or what prevents that? The rearward facing offensive defensive system. Now, contextually, you will see this concept played out both in the philosophy of the Bible, but also within the context of many other things. Solomon says two is better than one, right? But there's another part of that verse that says that if one was to stand back to back with the other, they would both have defense. Let me tell you what that's not. That's not inequality, and that is not a weaker vessel. Okay? So that's issue number one. Issue number one is a rearward facing system does not equate to a weaker system. It equates to another system. But now we're going to get some other context here. Okay? So some of the other context is going to come from the information that Yahweh provides to us in Genesis. Now, I know some of this I've already taught and you've already learned, but there's more to it, okay? So, when I recorded, because I have a bunch of archived recordings going all the way back to 2021, which was basically a time where a congregation member said, "Hey, I'm not going to make it for the Shabbat. I've got a family thing. I really want to hear what you have to say. What can we do?" And I said, "Well, let me research it and find out." And so I found out that I could record onto Zoom, that I could record my videos. And at that time, I was only broadcasting to the congregation live on Zoom. And so what's important is to know is that from that moment forward, I have an archive of every teaching I've ever done, but we did not get onto YouTube until 2022. And that's when those videos started accumulating. So going all the way back to, say, April of 2021, I taught a message about the inner voice, and that inner voice did not come from within you, but from within the from within the woman. In other words, a man's heart was steered by the inner voice. And where this becomes really important is when Yahweh says to Adam, "Because you listen to the voice of your wife," that was not a context of speech. Okay? So in that sense, what I want you to think about is if that voice is in order, we're going to get to the in order part, but let's assume it's in order. If that voice is in order, why is that voice speaking? Right? Okay. So the way that I want you to contextually align with this is if the voice is in order, the voice is speaking as a rear-facing offense or defense, meaning it's the eyes in the back of your head, okay? Now, where we have to kind of flex a little bit here is that we're going to take those energies, make them equal. For a moment, we're going to make those genders equal, and we're going to make it to where basically what we're talking about is the rearward facing versus the frontward facing defense and offense, okay? So the way I want you to think about this is that what is actually going on is this rearward facing defense, right? Doesn't need to turn because why? Because there's one back here. And what's it saying? I got one coming at you, but I got it, right? Well, what men do as a result of misogyny and as a result of a lot of distorted, disassociated, and disconnected processes do not understand that voice is your rear guard. Now, the proof, and you know this, you've learned this. So going back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, I believe it is. No, actually, 18. It says, and okay, let's see. Let's get back to the NASB so we're kind of neutral with everything. In verse 18, then Yahweh Elohim said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. Let's go into the Hebrew. Into the Hebrew, we are looking for this right here. Okay. This is Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer Kenegdo. Let's go listen to our guy, good old guy. He just does this horrible job of pronouncing things, but at least we hear a pronunciation, right? Let's see, here we go.
Strong's H 5828. AZ. AZ.
Nice try. Okay. And when I say nice try, it's because they don't pronounce their R correctly, and there's a number of it. There's no in Hebrew. Okay. Let's see. And then this one.
Strong's H 5048. Neged. Neged.
Okay. Now, first of all, it's going to be really important that we kind of look through the context here, but let's look at this right here. To be conspicuous, to tell, to make known. Okay. So the word to be conspicuous and to tell turns into, neged turns into what is conspicuous, what is in front of, straightforward, before, in sight, in front of oneself, straightforward, before your face, in your view or purpose. Okay. And you'll notice it's used 23 times, and it's not really ever used in any other context except before or against, in the presence of, or about. Okay. In the other, let me see if we've got a context of the other languages like Arabic and the other. Doesn't look like we do. Okay. So we're just going to leave that alone. Actually, you know what? Let's check the root for that. Okay, so in the Aramaic, to drag or draw or lead, and in the Arabic, to be courageous. Interesting. Vigorous, effective. I love it. This is actually really good stuff. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to explain why it is spelled, whoops, why it is spelled. Here, let me take a quick screenshot, and I will zoom in right here and say, why is it spelled this way in the verse, right? Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of that. All right, so going back to here, we see that it has this cough in front, okay? And this cough is context of, it's a preposition, and the best way, let me explain it to you this way. Okay, so if I have, let me see, I know I've got something around here. I do. Okay, give me a second, take this base off because it's really, really heavy and I don't want to hold it up. All right, so what I've got here is a microphone extension, usually has this really heavy base, but this is going to be great, okay? So in short, when I take my palm and I wrap it around this, my hand is conforming to the mechanism that I'm holding. I'm sorry, conforming as a mechanism to the thing I'm holding. Okay, so conforming is a mechanism. And so in principle, what makes this powerful is that now I've got a hold of this thing. Now, if I had the base on here and I was to let go, that would have really hurt. But the point is that there's a concept here that as you're grasping or holding, you are conforming to. In Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, in nomadic lifestyle, that means to be like or to clone or emulate. Okay. And so what this actually says is that I will make him a helper, right? And we're going to talk about the grammar here in a minute. A helper that is conformed to the presence of him or his presence, right? Okay. But what's crazy is what it said there was courageousness, conforms to his courageousness, or is what the embracing or conforming to courageousness of him. Okay, so now one of the things that I want you to think about is that this is worded a very specific way. Now, some interpreters have looked at this and said, okay, this is a series of prepositions and we have a real problem here. But truth be told, and because neged is also a preposition, vav is a preposition. Okay, so taking a look at this in this way. Oh, wow, I didn't have that on the screen. Okay, that's fine. We can go through this real quick. Okay, so first of all, going over to the nagad, okay? To be conspicuous, to tell, to make known, right? It's something in front. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. Neged is the preposition of it, right? To be in front of or to be conspicuous. All right. And then kenegdo, right there, kenegdo is a combination of a preposition kaf, a preposition neged, and a preposition vav. So the vav is possessive. It means his, right? The neged is a context, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then the kaf is an explanation of what she's going to have to do. What she's going to have to do is accept her responsibility as the courageous, victorious, right, and corrective element of him. Now that's the second word. Let's look at the first word. We've looked at this first word before, ezer, right, helper. To help or succor, right? Off of the ayin zayin chesh, to help, succor, support, right? And you guys remember what we did is we went and we looked in the ancient pictographic Hebrew and identified that this is watch with the weapon of the head. Oh man, you guys have no idea what kind of head weapon you're dealing with. Okay. So now the context is look at the Strong's. Isn't this something? It's used 21 times and it's translated as help or help meet. Okay? And those are the two verses, 2:18 and 2:20 of Genesis that we're working with right now. Getting back into our verse, I want you to see that the context here is Ezer comes before Kenegdo, okay? Ezer. Now, here's the part that's important about the word Ezer. I'm sorry, Ezer. Ezer, in most contexts, is a military help. Help, sword of Pharaoh. Right? Help against adversaries. Help, right? From what? Let's go look. Deuteronomy 33. Let's go look. The eternal God is the dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He drove out the enemy from before you and said, destroy, right? And then, blessed are you, O Israel, who's like you, a people saved by Yahweh, who is your shield and your help, and the sword of your majesty. So your enemies will cringe before you. Now, going back to this concept, okay, that's not where I want to be. Going back to this concept of the Ezer in Genesis 18, we will find that generally speaking, this help is a military backing. Okay? So two things come to mind right off of the jump street here. Number one is that perhaps maybe this Greek word weaker actually meant rearward. But let's say that it didn't. Let's say that it is actually working correctly within the confines. Let's say that Peter did write this letter. Let's say that he is an enlightened being and not some misogynistic jerk. And he wrote it in Greek, which is doubtful, right? In fact, I'll just flat out say he didn't. But then the next thing that we need to do is we need to identify the context of that weaker vessel, which was not strong. Okay. And so now what we need to do is we need to accept that your prayers, men, are being hindered because of your inability to dwell with her. Okay. All right. So now the next piece of this puzzle needs to become a context of voice, of what? Of victoriousness, and not only victoriousness, but courageousness, right? I mean, going back to Peter, I want you to or not Peter, sorry. Going back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, I want you to be aware of that statement that was brought up there from the other languages that have their context from the original Hebrew. What I mean by that, just for real quick, I'll say this. Ancient Semitic is the actual language that Yahweh chose to reveal himself to a people who eventually became his people. And that particular language had pictographic value, not phonic value. So it wasn't what you spoke, it was what you saw that was the indicator, right? And in that principle, then, communication was more about what you could write and draw and show than it was about what you could say. Don't get me wrong, I think they still spoke something, but it was communicated very clearly through their drawings. You say, well, how is that possible when Hebrew has so many meanings? You're not understanding that originally the concrete story, this concrete picture story, led to the stems that are the multiple meanings behind a singular word. Having said that, I think it's very important that we return to a concrete, momentary snapshot of a word and not a context-driven snapshot of a word. And what I mean by that is we don't take all the different meanings and stuff them into that moment. We take that moment and accept it. Therefore, the first use of that word should be the context every single time. Now, there's a number of theologians and also scholars who are proponents of that, and there's a number of opponents. In fact, the opponents are a majority. But we don't accept majority rules, for broad is the way that leads to destruction. Okay, so contextually then, we will identify this concept of conspicuous in the ancient languages. I'll just remind you that it is courageous, effective, vigorous, right? Efficient. Oh, and look at the beauty of the Aramaic: to drag, draw, lead. In fact, there's a concept of a leader in Ethiopic. Okay, and so there's a concept of travel, meaning what? To be a parent is not, oh, look at Peter speaking that beautiful mystical language now, is not an outward appearance of physical attractiveness, which would distract from her ability, if she used it inappropriately, to be the Ezer Kenegdo. Furthermore, a context that really needs to be understood here is the context of what's wrong with the husband. Two things. Number one, he's derelict of the Torah. It says, if he be disobedient to the word of God, you may win him without words through your appearance and your behavior. Okay, so two things. Number one, husband's out of line, not the wife. Okay, that's number one. Number two, his lack of ability to dwell with her correctly has actually led to a hindrance of his prayers. So this misogynistic jerk who supposedly went to Rome and changed Passover to Easter just so happens to be one of the most enlightened beings and one of the most powerful beings that has ever walked this earth. Actually was very, very particular about this verse and how it played a role in the failure of Christianity. And if you look back, it says things like, you're responding with unbelief, blah, blah, blah. Well, what if part of that unbelief was the missing of the context of the voice that comes from the rearward facing offensive defensive system? Oh, it gets even better. So what do we got? We've got the shield holding, right? We've got the courageous, vigorous, effective, efficient leader standing behind the husband. Well, I don't think you're ready for that. I don't think you're ready for what I just said. I just told you that the leader of the marriage is the woman. And where you may have already noticed this, men, is when she's mad, right? Yes, yes. But what you didn't know is that this is a divinely appointed process. And when you fall into it, you will grasp something that is going to absolutely bless you, blow your mind, and completely change your operation within the context of being in a marriage as a male and masculine principle, of being in a marriage as a female feminine principle. Okay? Okay. So the next most important thing here is that if you accept that this negad means to conquer, overcome. Let's just look at it one more time because I don't think you're ready for this, right? Men, what's behind you is really gonna hurt you. And guess who's there going, something's coming, right? She can see something, but what you don't know is the Hebrew context of the back and the front. See, what you think is that as a Western, okay, let me see if I can do this for the new people and for the Christian curious, right? The people who have come in here and like, what's this rabbi talking about, right? Okay, and and it's important for you to know that that's probably not the best title here, but what's he talking about, right? Okay, so then first of all, let's start here. Western Roman empirical colonized social democratic American Protestant neo-Catholic religion does not look at what is in front of them as the past. They look at what's in front of them as if it is the future. But in an ancient Hebrew lifestyle, what is in front of you is the past because you can view it. You have all the full 180-degree, maybe even wider peripheral and direct view of everything that has happened so far. What you can't see is behind you. And I'm going to tell you that that context comes from an explanation of Torah in that way to a people who are supposed to be walking that philosophical lifestyle. What I mean by that is what's behind you is actually your future, and who's behind you can see it. Oh, you're not ready for that one either. And the reason you're not ready for that one either is because we as men, let me tell you something. Ladies, do you know that one of the reasons why your man falls asleep while you're watching a romantic video and you think, oh yeah, this is boring to him, he doesn't appreciate it, is because he feels safe, and because he's in such an intimate state, because he's watching intimate things, he falls asleep. What I mean by that is that he doesn't feel like he needs to stay awake and guard himself, right? Okay, so any type of context of things that look like he is letting his guard down are the result of the fact that he actually feels safe with you. Well, that's actually happening by design. It's behind the hormones that he deals with. So what you need to know is that we at large, or in other words, when we're in our normal process as men, don't trust a thing. Everything is a threat. Everything is a possibility of danger. We're just pre-programmed that way. We're warriors. We like the sword. We draw the sword. We even named one of our numbers after the hilt of the sword, right? Number 5 for the 5 fingers that wrap around the hilt of the sword, where we get the word Hamash, which is what? Number 5, or Hamas, which is what? Violence, okay? We are built that way. We are designed that way. It is part of our process. And you need to know that the context of having someone stand behind us and tell us what's coming from behind is a really, really difficult one. Now, another context that needs to come into play here then is one in which there is an animal nature of the man who is going to naturally reject anything you say about what's back there. And the reason this is important is because the mechanism of that advice or of that statement undermines a protective nature within us that says, if I tell you to move or duck or run or hide, do it, because I value you more than myself, and I value that offspring of mine more than you. And so I need you to make sure that you keep us going on. If I die protecting you, make sure they are able to be me. Oh yeah, there's a bunch built into that, isn't there? But here's the part that's crazy. Listen to these words again. I'm going to read them to you and show them to you at the same time. Conquer, overcome, conspicuous, right? Courageous, vigorous, effective, right? To lead, right? Oh my gosh. Guys, this is it. This is one of the things that is the problem. But when I tell you the rest of this, your head's going to explode. Okay? I know we get a lot of exploding heads in this congregation. That's okay. All right. So now there is absolutely a principle that needs to now be in place. And that is, if she says that she wants something, you make it happen. And what I mean by that is that no matter what, your highest priority is to maintain the mechanism of desire within your Ezer, because she sees the future, you don't. And there's a context here. You could be a prophet, a seer. You could see the apocalypse and be a warning mechanism of that apocalypse and still need the Ezer. Okay? So don't think your gift gives you any precedence over the design behind the Ezer Kenegdo. Okay. Now, that principle needs to be carried over into a context of a system that would give you an idea of how all this works. Okay. You are the rearward facing system, which means you're not the PR. You are not the forward facing authority of the kingdom. You are the rearward facing protector, empowerer, and planner of the frontward facing system. Now, I want you to understand that context becomes extremely important when we start to look at this on a macrocosmic level. Right now, we're kind of microcosmic, and we're kind of attached to the 1% realm of the man and the woman and their interactions. But what I want you to understand is that Eve, well, whatever it is that was brought to Adam, because he's the one that named Eve, whatever it was that was brought to Adam was an Ezer Kenegdo. And if that be true, then everything within the mechanism of Adam needed to be dependent upon the future seeing ability or the backward seeing ability of the Ezer Kenegdo. Now, we're not going to get into this when it comes to the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and what Eve did and all that, because I'm going to tell you right now, either A, we're going to hash that out in the Midrash, which will be just with the congregation, or B, we are going to not touch upon it today because it's a whole nother level of uh-oh. But what you do need to know is that part of why your prayers are being hindered is not the result of how bad you're treating her, but because you don't understand the mechanism being presented to you in Peter. There's a couple things you need to know about Peter, okay? First and foremost, if you read the letters of Peter correctly, you will find they are both esoteric, ontological, mystical, I shouldn't say both, and apocalyptic. Okay. So they have an eschatological value. What does that mean? A value about the last days. They have an ontological value, that which is hidden and is concealed for a purpose, right? So when you go read things like the elements will burn with fervent heat, know that number one, there needed to be an apocalypse so that people would be afraid of the gates of hell at the time when the gates of hell were presented as an option if they did not conform to the behavior that was expected of the Pope. And furthermore, you need to know that that is what made them afraid significant enough to pay indulgences, which what? Funded the buildings of the Vatican. Which means what? We have a problem. That does not mechanize into a system that Peter meant to communicate. In fact, Peter says something very profound in one of his letters. He says, in the last times, people will err in their interpretation of Torah, just as some have already done in the reading of Paul's letters. Oh man. Guys, oh my gosh. Listen, Peter was on a whole nother level. And when you finally grasp this in its entirety. So what do we need to know? We need to know that if she asks for something, most likely it is because you have a blind spot and because you cannot see the danger coming, okay? Now I'm about to check you because I know you females are out there going, see, I told you so. Oh man, I'm about to rack your brain. But what I want to do is help you husbands or you men who have not yet become married or you men who are still seeking one to understand that A, and this is important, your operation is not complete without her. Okay? So thinking for a second that your mechanism of process is protecting the family and providing for the family and instructing the family, and that's singular in process, you need to realize your protector, your instructor, and your provider is, and this is important, the Ezer Kenegdo. So in that context, we have two things that are really important. Number one, who's the weaker vessel? It says, dwell with your wives as the weaker vessel. Okay. Now, if we're not careful, we could end up with some grammar problems. So let's do this correctly. Let's go back to Peter. Okay. And let's go look at this in the Greek, that it says as, okay, and let's find out that context of as is that word os, and let's find out what grammar structure it is currently in. Okay, it is a conjunction, but it has no whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. It has no context of attachment to, no, man, I can't get this. No. All right, tell you what, let me just do it this way. It has no context of attachment to the previous noun. Ooh, what does that mean? What does that mean? That means that it could say it this way. Husbands, who are the weaker vessel, dwell with your wives with understanding. Oh, we're about to get into that. Right? That's it. In other words, what has been always deemed the weaker vessel is the wife. But now, in your observance of this, are you not the weaker vessel? Because you need protection to the backside. You need that voice to be in operation to the backside. You need the observer to be operating within the rearward facing system. Right? Right. Okay. So the way that I want you to think about this is, what if what this was saying is as with, right? It doesn't say someone, it says as a weaker vessel. But what if the context of weaker vessel had to do with the greater that we have not discussed yet? Let me explain. Remember, the context here is not strong, but the nagad within the kenegdo is strong, courageous, etc. Meaning what? Meaning there seems to be, at least on the surface, a concept of the not strong needing a strengthener, right? But why would prayers be hindered? Oh man, wait till we get into this. Okay, so what I have taught you so far is that there is a concept here as the vessel of reception, which is the feminine principle within the female human. She's the one with the womb. She's the one that has the innie and not the outie, right? That's the concept here. She has an ability to receive a man into herself. So she definitely dwells within the realm of the vessel of reception. And within the context of the mystical understanding or the macrocosmic understanding, her desire comes before anything else. And she has a desire to receive. Okay? Okay. So now, in that context, we know that if she speaks a request of reception, we are to respond. In fact, there's an interesting verse in Torah that seems to indicate that if a concubine is within the household, or a second wife, as it were, is within the household, that the man is not allowed to diminish conjugal rights from her. In other words, she is allowed to express her desire to receive, and he is to respond without withholding it. Now, I'm not going to get into whether or not there should be a second wife within that. That's another teaching for another time. And some of you are not ready for the extremely important truth behind that verse. But what I want you to get is that even Torah commands the man to give to the woman what she desires and requests. You've heard the concept, happy wife, happy life. But what you don't realize is what the wife represents in the ontological system, in the mystical system, in the context of the prophetic. And that is the vessel of desire. Now, it is very important for you to know that if your wife requests something from you that is not within the confines of Torah, a filter needs to be applied. One, a realization that she is an unstable vessel at that moment. She is not within the confines of correct desire, distorted desire. So, for example, when Job's wife says, curse God and die, she's not within the confines of Torah, which means we need to, as men, interpret the desire correctly, not as the value that's being presented, but the value that's underwritten. Okay? And so if she asks you to violate Torah, you need to find out why. You don't need to blow her off and say, oh, yeah, no, we're not violating Torah. Forget it, woman. You go make me a sandwich, right? And so I think it is imperative that when we are within the context of this, that we accept that this is a map, that the female as a gender in the human race is a map of something we have yet to understand. Because as above, so below, Paul says, that which has been made tells us what? The invisible attributes of the eternal power and divine nature of God. You want to know about God? Look in the mirror. He will tell you everything you need to know about him because he put it in you. You are a pattern. You are designed, and your whole entire mechanism, your physiology, your hormones, your cognitions, your bio uniqueness, right? Your biodiversity, your function within the creation itself is all about him. But we err when we just say it's about him, because there's a hidden part. Remember, in Psalm 68, it says that the name of God is Yah, right? And I mean, we drive around with a license plate. We probably shouldn't, because God knows how many times I've probably given somebody the finger. But we drive around with a license plate that says Yah forever, right? But the context is that Yah is the name that has been revealed. The hiddenness of the name is in the Vav He. So Yahweh, the way part, is the hidden, the rearward facing, the feminine aspect of that word. Now the intrigue is what the number value comes out to be. So if we take the Yod He, then we've got basically the number 10 and the number 5, so that's 15. But if we take the Vav He, we've got the number 11. Now 11 is a very powerful number. But what you need to know is that that secret side, that secret level, will always have something to do with the context of desire. Now, this is what it says in James. It says, you are led away of your own desires. And led away from what? The path, hadarek. What is the path? The path is what's in front of you that you now have learned how to walk as a result of your view of the past, your hindsight. Now you know the path, you walk the path. Ha-derech, the path, okay? And the idea is that you are led away from the path, and as you are led away from the path, it is the result of desires. And those desires are not Torah aligned. And so those desires cause you to sin. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4 says, sin is a transgression of Torah. Transgression being a slip. You fire the arrow, but there's a slip. And when you slip, that arrow does not hit the bullseye. So sin, as a context, is a measurement of how far from that you actually were. In other words, how well you did, not how bad you're doing. But in principle, sin, being a transgression of the Torah, then is identified as a context of being led away of your own desires. Torah Torah unaligned desires that result in the miss. That particular miss results in what? Desire when it is, or I'm sorry, sin when it is fully conceived equals death, which is what? The empty belly as a result of what? A decrease in the abundance that you are to receive as a result of a proper sowing. Oh, but it gets even better. Remember what I said in the beginning about the equality of the distribution of light. Both you and your spouse, whether you are male or female, have the same identity in the jurisdictional context of God. In other words, God granted to you the authority to equally distribute the light in a just and merciful and compassionate and driven and humble way, in order for people to experience the light who normally wouldn't experience the light because people are too caught up in all of the opposites of what I just said. And where the context becomes important is in the fact that, remember, the woman is the rearward facing non-public relations process of protecting the king. And the context of that is contained within her voice, her observation, her ability to see her husband successful, in her courageousness and encouragement of him to begin with, where he just doesn't have courage. And you need to know something about men. We are scaredy cats. And I make sure the curtains are shut so I don't get sniped, because that's a man secret. We're terrified of everything. And that's why we can't sleep unless we feel safe. That's why we can't deal with things and we end up with addictions and everything. We're terrified. We're terrified of authority. We're terrified of letting people down. We're terrified of success just because of the possibility raises the bar, and then if we fail, it's worse. We're terrified, okay? You are that courage. That comes from within you. That's part of your light that you can equally distribute. You are an encourager. You are the victorious. You are the effective and efficient, okay? And so where this becomes important is, remember what I said, that women are a map of the secret side of Yahweh, the hidden, the Vav He element of Yahweh. And what you need to know and realize is that Vav He, and I'm telling you, this was the first message I ever recorded, the Vav He is the most important part of the Yod He Vav He. Okay? So Yahweh as a whole has a secret side or hidden side or concealed light and a revealed light. Revealed light, front facing. Concealed light, rear facing. So who can see the concealed light better than you? Her. Okay, so now we need to move into another element of this, and that is the element of who you as men and women actually are within the confines of the kingdom of heaven. We would agree that if we have a creator, let's establish a ground rule here. If you are created, which means you atheists who like to watch me because you love my philosophical stuff, just bear with me, okay? For the rest of you who believe you have a creator, those of you who believe you have a creator, this is what I want to ask. If you have a creator, what can you know for sure? Number one, that creator has an integral involvement in its process. Because if that creator was malevolent, then it would just set it up, let it play out, and not do anything about it. And that's not what we see in the Bible. Although we can't trust the Bible, I can tell you there's enough backing for things like the flood outside of the context of the Bible to give us an understanding that we definitely had an intervention. Okay? So, ground rule, the creator is interested in being involved in the creation's process. Filter number 2, if it is benevolent, then all it wants to do is give. Because I'm going to tell you a secret. Light cannot flow upward. Light can only flow downward through the process of compassion. So creator sees us in a state. Okay, let me show you compassion really quick, because as you guys know, my Hebrew name contains the word raham in it, right? Let's go look at that just really quick, because I want to make sure you understand compassion on the level that you are supposed to understand it. So let's go over to Exodus. Let's go to 33, I believe it is. Nope, 32. And nope, that's not it. 34. There we go. Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh Elohim, compassionate. Let's go to that word compassionate. So in the Hebrew, that is going to be Rahum. Let's see. Yep, there we go. Rahum. Okay, from the root word Racham, right? And then we'll just get that Strong's Concordance number right there, because this definition that Strong's gave is American and unfortunately very, very barbaric. Okay, so let's go into our lexicon and we'll just position that number in the search bar. Of course, we got to get rid of the H. And we're going to find out the real definition here. Okay? Racham, have compassion. To have a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. Let me tell you something. If I needed to define After His Heart Ministries in a way to help people understand what we are trying to do, this would be it. This would be like the core mission statement. To have a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. What does that mean? That means that every greater moves its energy, its blessing, its context of elevation to a lesser through compassion. Meaning, our second ground rule is that compassion is actually what needs to be present within this benevolent creator who wants to move energy. But that also means that light does not flow uphill, only downhill in the context of lower vibrations. In other words, you cannot send light upward to raise a vibration. That's a very different concept. that we can't get into at this moment. But what you do need to understand is that that means that there will always be the lesser. Now, is that the weaker vessel being mentioned in Peter? Yes, I believe so, but not the female. Let me explain. In the sense of a masculine process, we need to accept that if you are a receiver who is able to give, then you are not actually strictly feminine. And if you are a receiver who is able to give, then you are not strictly masculine. Now, I did not say male and female because your plumbing has decided your process within this kingdom. Okay? I do not jive with the context. I jive with the philosophy. Okay? So the philosophy or concept is that if you are able to receive and give, then you are both. And if you are both, then you are Yahweh revealed and not revealed. And if you are both, then you need to realize that as a weaker vessel, which would be one of those attributes. So is the man the weaker vessel and the greater vessel? Oh, yeah. Is the woman the weaker vessel and the greater vessel? Yes, but the men are being mentioned here. And therefore, we need to accept that what Peter's saying here is watch your wife, watch her behavior, because you're out of line with Torah, but also understand that this is how you operate as a weaker vessel. Learn from her womb, from her entry point, learn from her eggs and from her tubes how Yahweh actually exists in that hidden realm. Now, the next piece of this puzzle then would be that we understand that if the wife is a vessel of reception and therefore desire that you need to cater to as a greater, then you need to understand that what it's telling you to do is to become a lesser. What does that mean? That means that now you become the vessel of desire. Now, it needs to be Torah aligned, because if it's not, it'll be interpreted. Okay? Because what it's going to do is it's going to go and it's going to look and see if it's Torah aligned. And if it's Torah aligned, then it's going to shoot right up the ladder as a request. But if it's not Torah aligned, it's going to go through a bunch of filters to figure out the actual mechanism of the heart in that moment. And so it needs to be Torah aligned, but if it's not, I'm going to tell you this, and this is going to sound crazy, but you just ask for what you want. Men, you need to see what that's actually saying there. Dwell with her, watch her, and see how to be her, because you are her in the context of your creator. And the only thing between you and your creator is the light. And if you use the light inappropriately, well, you just need to study the Omer to know that. But the point is that if you use the light inappropriately, it's got to go somewhere, and it's going to go to the light eaters. It's going to go to those who are going to intercept your blessing, blah, blah, blah. Right? So in principle, you dwelling or operating within the light. That's why Yeshua said, you're the light of the world. Why would you put it under a bushel? Right? And then in a number of other places, he says, don't distribute your light and think that that's the reward. It's not. They don't do that in secret. Don't tell people that you're distributing the light. Right? Do not make it a public spectacle. And unfortunately, men who are frontward facing already have a mentality of PR. So now what's interesting is if you're Torah aligned in your desire, and he's the greater, and his process is compassion, then we run into a real problem when we start to get into things like, for example, when Yeshua said, not my will be done, but your will be done. And then we see in another place in his training of prayer, thy will be done. But what you need to accept, and this is important, is that the word will is a very, very inappropriate translation of that concept. And that is that the context of will does not dwell, within God himself, but within us. Now, that will needs to have a source, because what will really is jurisdictional authority to move something. Okay? So when Yeshua says, not my will be done, but your will be done, you need to understand what he was saying there is, do not obey me as a man because I have a desire to not go through this. And I know that you will obey me if I tell you to, because you gave me that power. And that's the concept of the Adamic covenant that you have no clue about, because you've been told by this neo-Catholic thing that's here in America that is practically the closest version of witchcraft that you could possibly define in the Bible, Christianity, that there's only one will, and that's the will of God. But what you need to realize is that he conformed his will to Adam's and said, okay, Adam, you call the shots. Why? Because he wants Adam to choose him so that he could benefit from the light without any other motivation as a free will agent. Adam needs to be able to say no, needs to be able to rebel, needs to be able to fall into the context of disobedience in order to truly have sovereignty. But furthermore, Yahweh is going to allow the entire universe to alter as a result of Adam's thoughts, behaviors, and words. And so what you need to realize is that the sons of Adam inherit that covenant. And before you even contextually try to make it that each covenant annuls the last covenant, you need to look at the rainbow, you need to look at the exile of Israel, and you need to look at the context of the new covenant. What I mean by that is everybody says, oh, we're under the new covenant. But truth be told is the new covenant in Jeremiah 31 through 34 says the Torah, that's what it says in the Hebrew, Torah shall be written upon your heart, which means what? The other covenant, the Old Testament, the Old Covenant would be written upon your heart. Well, what does Paul say? Paul says if a Gentile does the things of the law, he shows himself to be a law unto himself. Meaning what? It originated from inside of him. Oh, and guess what? That whatever happens within those confines is definitely the result of Torah. And that Torah has been written upon his heart. And that his conscience accuses him and defends him because it's been written upon his heart. Meaning what? A New Testament Christian Gentile is actually under an old covenant that's now been written upon the heart and is no longer written on a scroll that you have to go and read. In fact, it says, no longer will they need to be told to know me. All will know me, from the greatest to the least of them. Greatest, least, greater, lesser, etc. But the point being is that within the new covenant are the confines of the old covenant. So what you need to know is that the Adamic covenant is still ratified. It's still in action. It has not been canceled, which means what? Dominion still applies. And if it does, then what you need to understand is that when you make a request to God, it's like when your wife makes a request. It needs to be actioned upon. Will it be filtered? Yes, absolutely, it'll be filtered. But you need to live as a weaker vessel. You need to copy her. You need to receive like her. When she is willing to lay down and share herself with you, and in that moment experience a reception because of her desire to receive, she's teaching you how it's supposed to work with Yahweh. And what you need to know is that that part is the part that's where your prayers are hindered. Because what you've been doing is praying a certain way, but you have not been activating this mechanism that, in short, says it's gonna be answered. But it will be filtered according to the alignment of Torah, according to just weights and measures, and according to the level of humility present in the requester. If you request and then go try to do it on your own, that's witchcraft. In fact, anytime that you try to obligate the universe or Yahweh to conform to your desires or activate your desires or give you your desires, that's witchcraft. But in the process of becoming a stable vessel of desire, by observing how your wife does it, you'll find something amazing out. Number one, somebody's going to show up at your door and they're going to go, if you can answer these questions, you can advise me. Who did that? Job. Yahweh comes up to Job and says, if you can answer these questions, I need some advice. Number one, was Yahweh being sarcastic? Nope. That's not an operation of the intensification of all power in the universe. That's an operation of humans with wounds who like to wound other people. Okay? Was he actually going to ask Job questions he couldn't answer because he didn't want his advice? No. Job probably could have answered a majority of the questions that were present in that process. But Job somehow, within the confines of his understanding, knew that the first thing he needed to do in that situation was get small. And he did. And as a result, there was something that we don't understand. He answered the questions. And he became Yahweh's advisor. Now, I know you can't handle that, and you'll probably go through in the comments and try to tell me I'm wrong and evil and everything else. That's fine, you can do that. But what you need to realize in this whole thing is that when you are stable, Torah aligned, operating within the confines of just weights and measures, within the humility of that process, it's going to come to you. Everything that you want or need. And I'm going to tell you something. One of the huge, foul things that Christianity teaches is that you only will be provided for what you need. You need to go read Deuteronomy 28 that says, if you keep Torah, if you keep my commandments and my statutes, and you honor them to do them, then these things will fall upon you. You'll be the head and not the tail. You will have the superiority in the business negotiation. That's what it says. You will be superior as a nation. That's what it says. You will have an abundance of crops, an abundance of children, an abundance of blessing. Your wife will be blessed, and all of her maidservants will be blessed, which has a number of different contexts, but I can tell you one of them could potentially be that she will have her own workforce, her own businesses, etc., etc. If, I had some sicko one time at a camp designed to help men become more authentic, tell those men that Christ had made it possible for them to access all the blessings of Deuteronomy and not have to worry about the curses and not have to keep Torah. What a sicko. Okay, so I want to say this, and I want you to understand this. What I'm telling you today is that what it appears to say in the context of that entire section of verses in Peter, and within the mystical overlay that is not present in Christianity, not present in Judaism, but is present in Hebrew nomadic philosophy, you men are the weaker vessel, but you're supposed to be as the weaker vessel. In other words, copy her mystically, because you're already out of line with Torah. That's what it says up there at the top. You're out of line with Torah. So get a Torah alignment and then become the vessel of desire. Become a receiver and willing to accept. Here's the part. Oh, this is extremely important, men. Be willing to accept the answer. This is extremely difficult because one of the things I've found is that when I've thought that I'm Torah aligned, I'll make a request and I will become a vessel of desire. I will experience this and operate within what I'm trying to teach you here. And the result comes in some strange ways. And I'm just like, okay, that's probably what I prayed for, but not quite what I prayed for. Right. And so the way I want you to look at this is you need to count the cost beforehand. You need to say, okay, I'm going to make this request. Now I just need to accept the answer. That's a true vessel of reception. She's willing to lay down and accept whatever is offered. He's willing to lay down and accept whatever is offered from that greater. And in that moment, he is a she. Now, before you even think that I am speaking of gender fluidity within the confines of this 1% realm where your plumbing has indicated what you are, you're mistaken. This is in the 99% concealed light realm that I'm talking about. And as you begin to walk it out, it will be in front of you, but right now it's behind you. You do not understand it and don't see it. Now, I want to address something because I want to make clear that when I was in the sacred name movement, which is where I was trying to force people to say Yahusha and Yahshua and Yahuwah and all that other hogwash, because I did not understand the importance of what I had been taught to begin with and had gotten sucked into something because somebody used a very, very important tool, which is guilt, to try to convince me that I needed to step into that realm. There's a point in time where the intensification of all power in the universe stepped in, some sort of voice in me said, when did I ever ask you for help? You do not need to be zealous for the pronunciation of my name. I didn't ask you to, and I don't like how you're treating people. Because I had flat out stepped into the sacred name movement in such a way that anybody who did not believe that way was a heretic and believed that they were demonic. And he came in and said, okay, that's enough of that behavior. You need to clean that up. And one of the things he showed me is that he doesn't need our help. So does he need our advice? No. But why did he bring the animals to Adam and allow him to name them? Because he likes that process of synergy, community, common unity. And what you need to realize is the echadness of the marriage and the echadness of the divine principle of marriage, where there is a greater and lesser. There is an active, greater, expansive, outward assertion, and a passive, lesser, receptive, contractive, right? And so what you need to know from that is those two coming together become echad, and something amazing occurs. And obviously in this 1% realm, you know what that amazing is. That's your offspring. You know that what you're looking at in front of you as you're raising it is you being perfected. All of what is the flaw of you is now becoming the beauty of you. How much more in the realm of Yahweh being the greater, you being the lesser. Now, we need to get into something very interesting. And that is, we know that because the female has an inward reception and an outward birth, that she also can give. So in the 1% realm, the person who has the plumbing to conceive, carry a baby, and have that baby has the ability to give light. And that is extremely important here because that means that she's also a receiver and giver. So what does she need to do? And this is where you women need to listen. She needs to learn how to be the greater through him by allowing him to teach her what a greater does. Does this only fall into the realm of the bedroom and the bed? No. This falls into the realm of his ability as a warrior to protect, to instruct, and to provide. And that doesn't mean that he has to be those things. It means that you need to learn how to do those things. So what does that mean? You ladies who may think you're warriors need to learn from the warrior. And what that means, unfortunately, is that a lot of times when you think you are right, and so you try to step in and instruct him, it is because your nature is to protect him. But here's the problem, and this is going to be the absolute dysfunction of this entire teaching. You are afraid to be locked into an obligation because of the fact that in this day and age, technically speaking, if you're a man, if there is a man, he understands a woman in one context, and that's reproduction. He has not been taught your power. And furthermore, you have been taught to operate within a wound that is systemically a virus within the moral majority of Christianity. And that is misogyny. But you need to realize that it is a very different context by which Yahweh operates within his Torah and the servants of Torah, the Shomer Torah, the guardians of Torah, the writers of the Bible, Joshua, David, Solomon, right? These people who wrote this book were guardians of Torah. And so what you need to know from that perspective then is that Torah communicates these things to you: the greater, the lesser, the masculine, the feminine, the female, the male. And there is a mechanism built into the entire thing that's a check and balance on the Ezer Kenegdo, and that is that the man can cancel the contract of a woman, meaning the man can prevent her from distributing her light. You need to know that that jurisdiction, that authority, you can't undermine. Now, there's a number of other things that we could get into here, but in short, and the best way for me to explain it to you is that there's only a couple areas in which the man is supposed to be in authority within the marriage. But the controller of the marriage is the woman. She sets the temperature. Because what you need to know is that whatever temperature you tell a man to be at, he'll maintain. So be careful, because when you start the nagging thing, or you start the oh, this didn't get done, or you're not this, or you can't do this, you're telling him what frequency to vibrate at, because he'll just vibrate at that frequency, whatever frequency he's told. That's why we make great soldiers, is because if we're told to do something, we'll go do it, even if it's going to kill us. Especially if you convince us that it is the right thing to do, which is where a lot of manipulation comes from within the woman. So there's an element of authenticity that needs to be present in this entire operation. That's what Peter's trying to communicate to you ladies with the beads and the braids and all that other junk. That's just totally misinterpreted. He's trying to show you that there's an authentic you that has an authentic responsibility to the him, and that you as men have an authentic responsibility to learn, which means both genders are supposed to be learning how to be the part of Yahweh that they can't be because of their physical sexual gender, because that's the unrevealed light within them. And the beauty of revealing that light is the privilege of being king. So I want to share with you a concept here. Gender-wise, when we hear things like sons of God, the NASB and the NLT and a number of others will add things like, for example, when Paul says, I'm speaking to you, brethren, immediately the liberal context of needing to make sure that both male and female are included in that letter, they change those words to brothers and sisters, not understanding that brethren is a code word for Pharisees. It will say something like, you men, and then in italics, and women. It will say something like, men, you are supposed to do this. Or Torah will say, sons of Israel. But what you need to understand is that the woman is a concealed son. The man is a revealed son. The woman is a concealed son. How do we know? Daughters of Zelophehad. If you ever need to understand that if there is no man of authority present, a woman of authority will be raised into his place until that authority can be restored. That woman of authority has all of the characteristics of the masculine principle. Meaning what? The light has been revealed in her. That concealed part of her has been revealed. Now, does this go towards that multicolored flag in behavior? No. There is a purpose and a reason behind the gender inequality, but it's not what you think. And so for those of you who need to feel validated because I said that you can't do the lifestyle or the behavior that you think that you can do because of what I just said, I am putting that disclaimer in there. I am not endorsing behavior forbidden by Torah. I am saying that within the confines of the supernatural being that you are, there actually is no gender. There's a revealed gender and a concealed gender, which means that when it says sons of God, it means sons of God. Unrevealed son of God, revealed son of God. Meaning what? Meaning that the woman needs to learn how to be a son of God from a son of God. But the man needs to understand that that context does not make him superior. It just makes it that he's visible and she's not. So please don't try to twist it. Don't try to add that thing so that all the genders are included in the verse. Pay attention to why it's spoken the way it's spoken and how it is spoken. Because I can tell you, the courageousness within you, ladies, is revealed in your ability to grasp the neged, keneged, to grasp the responsibility of being that valor that's his. Being his valor, being his courage, being his victory, being his leadership. You want to see him shine as a leader? Lead him. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you think for a second that you will be allowed to feign the voice, in other words, that you will say, well, the Lord told me, and him listen, and you think you got away with something, I'm going to tell you right now, the universe is going to react. Because that's not how this works. Your voice needs to be from somewhere that you do not conjure. Because that's witchcraft. Okay? And that's why a lot of Christianity is witchcraft. Is because it's a constant state of trying to obligate God to do something, trying to obligate God to a system, trying to obligate God to a confession, to a creed. when you won't even honor his Torah. You will not listen to his teaching and instruction. You have no idea how devastating that is to your reality, that you have replaced Passover with Easter, that you have replaced tabernacles with Christmas, that you have placed within the confines of some of the most powerful appointed times of God, your own darkness, your own opinion, your own will. And I'm going to tell you, a will without a source is Satan. Okay? So what you need to realize is that as an adversary of God, right? The flesh is enmity with God. The flesh is an adversary of God. So your ego as an adversary of God, as in the Hebrew, Hasatan, which means the adversary, you are actually presenting as a problem. And that's the part of you that won't keep Torah, that doesn't want to give up pork, that doesn't want to walk within the feast days. So you can't even Torah align for your prayers. No wonder they're hindered. No wonder you're having the problems that you're having. Now, there are other things like wounds, limiting beliefs, and a number of other things that, because the truth is, I, the Lord, test the hearts. Your actual authenticity is shrouded in shadow of your wounds, your limiting beliefs, your entitlements, your lack of imagination, your inability to understand covenant, your ridiculousness about sacrifice, and your lack of understanding about gender. Those are the damaging elements here. Lack of humility, unjust weights and measures. You're going to judge somebody else and you won't even judge yourself. Listen, I will tell you again, like I've told you before, if you read the Bible and say, oh, that's what that person's supposed to do, you are an enemy of the Bible. And not only that, but you do not get to say the things that you say to other people when they don't want to listen to you. You don't get to say, oh, well, you'll learn to listen or you'll see. No, you will see. And what you need to understand is that at the core of this thing is the disintegration of the divine marriage context. In short, and this is important, men are in a constant state of fear of being rejected, being disrespected, being expected and told what to do by their wives. And if they don't get a happy home. Women are in a constant state of believing that they need to connive and manipulate and coerce and force because they have been painted as this serpent, as this weakness, as this failure of God. And I can tell you, it's not that hard to buy into identities when you are treated a certain way. Look what happened to Israel in Egypt. They became systemically idolatrous as a result of being worn down. And thank you so much, Yehoshua, for opening my eyes on that. They literally lost their identity because they were constantly told they were something else. Don't think for a second, if you tell a human being, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, that you're not going to get that. And so that's the disintegration of the marriage. And now here's the crazy part. What do we got going on? We've got willpower of both people trying to endure the ridiculousness of each other because they're both misaligned. And on top of that, we've got nothing even remotely close to the original divine mapping and purpose. And so what's the solution? Well, I can tell you. You men have become vessels of reception in front of your screen instead of to Yahweh. You women have become vessels of defiance in front of your men instead of their rear guard. And I can tell you, none of that is within the function of God. You cannot find that light on the tree of life. You cannot find it because it's not there. There are people, even in my congregation, who think there's something important and who believe that God exclusively deals with them and who believe that there is some sort of special relevance to their interaction with God versus anybody else's. I'm here to tell you that correction is coming. And I can tell you that the best thing that we can do is get small. Men, you need to get small, become a vessel of desire. Just ask for it. It will be filtered, okay? So what comes, you need to be ready for, but it will be filtered. Just ask for it. Even if it is not within the confines of Torah, because you just can't align yet with that, it will be filtered. Because God knows if your wife told you, hey, let's go do some witchcraft and let's go worship this other God, you'd be like, hey, lady, you're about to get kicked out of this house, right? You see how you can filter it, so you know Yahweh can. This is about trust. And truth be told is about a betrayal of trust. Because we form these expectations that we call trust instead of understanding the mechanism of trust. And so we react to betrayal that doesn't exist, but we've constructed, and therefore that's a false Torah, which means what? Satan's going to be involved. The serpent's going to come and talk, right? But also it means that we don't understand trust correctly, and therefore we can't operate within the mechanism of it. You need to trust the system, not the individual, because the system itself is perfect. It was designed perfectly. And so the Vav He of Yahweh needs to be revealed. Well, what does it say? Remember I said this about gender that you need to check in your brain, okay? It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to what? To reveal it, right? To seek it out. So what is she? She's an unrevealed light king. What are you? A forward-facing king. Can she unveil that light? Yes, of course. Can she be a king who seeks it out? Yes, of course, but not as a female queen, as a king. And see, that's the huge hang-up that we get into because of this barbaric language. You see, in Hebrew, nouns and verbs are masculine and feminine. It's a no-brainer. You can just go in and find the masculine and feminine processes. But in English, everything's just a mess. So a king is acknowledged in everybody's eyes as a male. But what you need to realize is a female who's to uncover something that the glory of God concealed is a king that's unrevealed. Okay, I think that's probably enough, because I think one of the most important things that I don't think I need to do a part 2 here. And the reason I don't think so is because what you need to realize is that you are at that bottom part as the perfect vessel of reception. You men need to dwell as the weaker vessel with the woman who will teach you through those mechanisms, because you're not even aligned to Torah correctly, right? You need to understand the Torah of the bride. If you understand the Torah of the bride, you as a man can unveil that light that's in you as the bride, that she already knows how to do because she is the bride, and can teach you, right? So this is crazy, but part of this entire thing is seeking out the concealed light of the other, right? Okay, so in those confines, I want to just say that if you feel like you have just been completely derelict of these concepts, I welcome you to comment in the YouTube channel, or if you're in the congregation, comment in Slack, bring it up, in the fellowship channel, and just say, hey, you know what? I don't understand any of this. I need you to tell me more. You can DM me, whatever. I want us to stop this Christianese madness that is the order of the day, not only for this congregation, who I'm speaking to specifically right now, but to those of you who need to come to this congregation and become a part of it and learn from it. Because what you don't see on these videos is the depth that you are missing. At any rate, I'll say Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for listening.